Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of Eye of the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole Lore and Frame, the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. It's weird, honestly. I've been meaning to make this video for a long time, but I keep getting sidetracked. I keep getting kind of forgetting to talk about it. And today, when I have like a lot of free time, after work, spending so much time working on Jaw of the Dragon and getting everything else done, like I really like sat down and realized I'm like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to make that video for a long time. So let's talk about it. The most important thing I think that happened in the mid 2000s, the mid 2010s, I should say, the new tens, I think people are calling it. The most important things that happened in the new tens, Gamergate. Like, I really wanted to kind of reflect on this topic for a long time and kind of discuss it at length and kind of talk about like my history with it. I really wonder just how much people agree with me on these subjects because I think Gamergate was a massive cultural milestone. I think it was the first instance of people like really coming together and doing something great. We took on the entrenched gaming establishment, the people who've been selling us bad games for years, who have been trying to convince us that like games like Resident Evil 5 were racist, or that like Mass Effect was extremely great, was a great like innovative sci-fi property because it was progressive. Those people, like those guys spent years and years just destroying video games. And then in 2014, we got a group of people, a dedicated group of people who came together and told them, no, it's over. Like, you can't keep doing this. And although like they fought back against this, although they resisted, although they like declared themselves the winners, and in the end, what happened is that like Gamergate was right about everything. And because it was such a big deal, because there were so many people talking about it, because like corruption in video game journalism became like such a sensationalized headline for such a long time, it kind of entered the public consensus consciousness without ever really needing to have like any major victories of its own. Like, in a way, I think Gamergate lost a lot of battles in the sense where like essentially everyone who was pushing for it on YouTube, people like Shoe on Head, people like Mr. Medic, or internet aristocrat, excuse me, people like Ethan Ralph, Total Biscuit, all these people were either like grifters or like backed away from the movement in order to like preserve their careers in like whatever field. Like, although like essentially everyone involved with like the official side of things with Gamergate were like pathetic people who like were just kind of grifting off of like this idea that like gamers had, like that video game journalists were bad at their jobs. It it took off. Like, the reality is that like nobody really takes game journalism seriously anymore. When these people came out in 2020 to defend like The Last of Us Part 2 and call it a masterpiece and call people like shitting on it like misogynistic or that like they didn't understand the plot, the gamers simply laughed at them and did not buy the game. And like now I'm seeing articles about like how woke culture is dying and how like films and movies are just being rejected for being woke. And I can't help but think that like Gamergate started this. Gamergate is what kicked off the anti-woke movement. It existed in some form in like the aughts and like the early 2010s, but like it really came to a head with Gamergate. And because it was such a big thing, because like we actually resisted and because we actually did something about it, we accomplished something great. We saved video games. Like, we essentially set the stage for like the Nintendo Switch. And although that the game journalists tried their best to like bury the console, like going into this, like they did with the Wii U. At that point, like they had lost a lot of their influence, right? Like, a lot of the stuff they were talking about, like they were using to destroy Nintendo for the past 20 years. It was no longer relevant, and they didn't have the talent, the skill, or the influence to really like manipulate the audience to like fall for their bullshit again for this next upcoming generation. And what that resulted in was like one of the most like successful generations for Nintendo ever, and like some of the best games ever made, and like a new golden age in video games in general. And I I have to wonder, like, people just don't. I don't think we need. I don't think it needs to be historically known that Gamergate was like the cause of like the anti-woke movement. I don't think it needs to be understood among the general population. What matters is that like people know that like wokeness in like these institutions, in this in government, in schools, in academia, in our entertainment, that it is a problem, and they need to respond like as a result of that. They need to treat this like the epidemic it is. And I think more and more people are starting to like take actions against like, you know, in their personal lives and like learning how to deal with degeneracy in their home lives or with their people, like with the people around them, right? Like it's remarkable seeing how the LGBT community that I grew up with, the people who were like insisting they were super happy and content with what they were doing. It's interesting seeing like how people like me are like, or like the people who got married and had children, all right, like normal, well-adjusted people. It's interesting seeing how like those people are doing with their careers, with their stable lifestyles, with like their children, how much happier and more stable than they are than these drug addicted, degenerate like weirdos that are becoming more and more detested by the day. You know, like I do think we're kind of at that point where people are learning how to deal with wokeness as like a concept. And the best thing to do, honestly, is be a genuinely good person. Like this has been a thing that's been, people have made this observation about 4chan for a long time, but like, 4chan made a shift like around like the new tens from being like this edgy, like leftist, like radically, degenerate hive to like being like the last beacon of morality in our culture. And a big reason for that is because like being a good person has been like looked down on in society for the longest time by like our institutions, by our leaders, by our government. And like the fact that Gamergate accomplished as much as it did in spite of no backing from like any meaningful person like in anything. There were no YouTubers, there were no game journalism in the industry, there was no one like standing up for them. Like it was the entire establishment against the people, and the establishment lost. The establishment was not able to maintain their absolute control over the industry. And like now these days, they've lost a lot of ground to people like Angry Joe and like these YouTubers who are also corrupt. But unlike the old days, I think more people are like willing to call out these YouTubers for what they are. Like whenever I see people talk about Arlo, like seriously talking about Arlo, it's like complaining about him. Like Arlo just has a dedicated following of like kids because of the Muppet. But at the end of the day, he's not like influencing anyone. Like nobody is going to like look at this guy and think that he's like some arbiter of like quality in video games, right? Like people are taking notes. They're like registering these individuals. They're observing their reliability and like how often, whether or not they push agendas or how genuine they are. Like because of the way the system works now, it's really difficult to like manipulate people into believing something ridiculous, And I think more and more we're going to start seeing that, like not only in video games, but like in all of entertainment, and I think wider society, in that people are going to start waking up to the bullshit. In a lot of ways, it's happening already. It's remarkable seeing the people around me just kind of realizing just how ridiculous the past couple of years have been. And it really is growing, I think. It's not going anywhere. The establishment lost. And I think that's the thing to take away from this, is that like Gamergate was never about video games. It was about like the issue in all of society, and like how these certain individuals were trying to control you and control what you enjoyed and control what you thought about the products. That kind of thinking, that kind of behavior is never going to be accepted by the population at large. And like, even though they had absolute control over everything, even though they were networking and trying to push agendas and like do everything in their power to like control the population, in the end, they failed. That's the thing, is that like controlling the population for like, a decade, for a year, 2 years, for 5, for 10, for 20, for 100, like, no matter how much time you spend like trying to indoctrinate and control a population, they are never going to be 100% like in line with what you say. Like eventually the cracks are going to start to form and they're going to widen and everything's going to collapse. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is that we are seeing a lot of pushback to these ideas, to these practices, and these people. And it didn't start with Gamergate, it didn't end with Gamergate. It it started and it started way before that, and it's still going on today. Like, we haven't won Gamergate, but neither have we lost. You know, like, in the end, I think what really matters is that you enjoy your life and what you're doing and like what you're involved with and your community and like the world around you, your entertainment or whatever. Find the good things that have existed in the past, like that will always exist, rather than focusing exclusively on the stuff that's like focused that's pushed on you, right? Like, yeah, you should be rejecting Marvel, you should be rejecting Star Wars, you should be rejecting Star Trek, you should be rejecting all these like corporate products trying to make you like think of the world in a different way than it actually is. Like, you need to just kind of focus on like, what actually matters to you, I think. And I think when you find that, when you find like a sense of fulfillment, there's really not a whole lot they can do to you. And I think more and more people will wake up to that fact going forward.